Hey, Sarah here. We're going to talk about Oregon's ASD eligibility. So ASD stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. The objective of this slideshow is to clearly define the Oregon Educational Eligibility for Autism Spectrum Disorder for teachers who work with students with autism. So this presentation really is focused and targeted to teachers who have students in their classroom with autism so they can really understand what the Oregon Educational Eligibility is. If you work or teach or intend to teach outside of Oregon, go ahead and look up your state's autism eligibility for that state because every state has a different eligibility criteria. So I'm going to start with the quote. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I'm not totally sure who said this, but this is a common saying in the world of autism. It's really important to remember that autism is a spectrum and there is a huge variety of individual needs. And again, just like the quote says, if you met one person, really that's that one person's experience. And what's kind of interesting and fun about working in autism is that you get to know each individual so uniquely because their autism presents so differently. In the field of education, we identify students with an educational eligibility for autism spectrum disorder, provided the student meets the Oregon criteria. So in our world of education, we use the term eligibility, and the world of medical diagnosis is diagnosis. To receive an educational eligibility in the state of Oregon, a student must present with impact in the following areas. And just like any disability, you have to make sure that the student is experiencing educational impact, that they are not able to access the gen ed curriculum because of the disability. And I want to make sure that we do talk about education in the broad term, as far as not just academics, but also looking at the social, pragmatic piece of education. Because as we know, if students are not able to, socially work in pairs, for example, then they're not able to do group assignments. So we're not just looking at the academic impact. Education is much broader in its terms. So because autism is a social impairment disability, we have to look at educational impact as it relates to social impact as well. So the areas that we have to have deficits in are social communication and social interaction. And we have to make sure for an eligibility, we have to have all three of these deficits. And it has to be currently or by history. So if we have a student who used to have these impairments, then we can consider that as well. The parent interview and the evaluation process is a big piece of understanding if there was a historical impairment in these areas. So all three of these have to be a yes, is that there's deficits in social, emotional reciprocity. That's the back and forth of social emotional. Deficits in nonverbal communicative behavior used for social interaction. So when we think of nonverbal communication, we might think of facial expressions, body in space with your communication partner. Are you facing that partner? Are you facing away? Are you looking away? And then we have to have yes on deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So a lot of times you'll see that is a challenge in developing, starting friendships, keeping those friendships, and even understanding how close of a relationship we have. Like, is this a close friend, acquaintance, good friend? So understanding what those relationships look like. And then in this area, we have to have at least 2 of the 4 deficits have to be identified currently or again by history. So restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests of activities. So remember, we have to have 2 of these 4. So stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. Insistence of sameness, inflexibility, adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Highly highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. And then this is a new one that was added is hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. This is a chart version that was, I want to give credit to the Oregon Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorder. They put out this chart that has those three areas that have to be a yes here in social communication deficits. And then two of these four here. So you can see here, child must demonstrate at least two of the four in the restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activity. So if you're a visual person and like charts, this is a nice chart version of that same information that I just shared. So the evaluation team will look at whether the student presents with deficits in these four areas across time, with intensity, and in the current educational setting. I do want to point out that the medical model, which is they use the DSM-5 to diagnose students with autism. As some of you know, that there is a newish, I guess 2013, that's the last time it was updated, diagnostic criteria in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So it updated to version 5, in which it aims to clarify the official definition of autism. While some say it narrows the definition, others say it creates one central diagnosis, autism spectrum disorder, instead of multiple different disorders. Under the new guidelines, a high functioning child with Asperger's syndrome will receive the same diagnosis as a nonverbal child, but the diagnosis will be more descriptive. So instead of receiving a diagnosis of Asperger's, the child may receive one of ASD with strong language skills and high intelligence. So in the field, a lot of us still refer to the term Asperger's, even though it is not currently in the DSM-5 any longer. I do want to read out the updated definition for autism spectrum disorder in the state of Oregon. It means a developmental disability that includes persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Characteristics are generally evident before the age of 3, but may not be fully evident until social demands exceed limited capacities or may be masked by learned strategies. Characteristics cause educationally and developmentally significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. The term does not apply if a child's educational performance is adversely affected, primarily because the child has an emotional disturbance. However, a child who qualifies for special education under the category of autism may also have an educational disturbance as a secondary disability if the child meets the criteria under emotional disturbance. The term autism spectrum disorder is equivalent to the term autism. And there are the OARs if you'd like to look that up specifically. So just as a little summary, they can have emotional disturbance, but it has to be the secondary disability category, not the first. Autism would have to be the first in this case. So this is, again, credit to the Oregon Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorder. They put that same information that I just shared in a chart version. So these additional criteria have to also be a yes to be considered a student with autism in the state of Oregon. So this slideshow was intended for teachers that are not necessarily involved directly in the autism evaluation process. However, you will be giving input to the process. But if you are directly involved in conducting the autism evaluation, it would be really important for you to look at the TAP, which stands for the Technical Assistance Paper. I'll try to remember to link the TAP in this video so you have access to it. But this goes into all of the requirements for an autism evaluation to be done correctly, including the medical history, the parent interview, how many observations and what settings, what standardized autism tools are considered appropriate, and additional tools to measure, cognitive capacities, and the social communication assessment that's done by a licensed speech pathologist. All the additional pieces are in the TAP. So if you want to do a deep dive to make sure you are understanding exactly what's involved in the thorough evaluation, I would check out the TAP. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this helped clarify how a student in the state of Oregon becomes eligible for autism spectrum disorder.